But I'm super interested in why you're podcasting, why you have that really fancy microphone, and why you're really interested in telling these stories. I know why I do it. I'm curious why you're doing it.
Well, thanks for
Um,
asking, really.
yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
You want to tell me why?
I'll start with the first thing. Now, this microphone was purely because I've always had that dream of owning this particular microphone. I've looked at the Shure Super 55 for a decade now, ever since I saw it in all those movies back then. And I just said, I have to get me one of these,
It's a
right?
classic.
Oh, I love it. I
Yeah,
absolutely love
beautiful.
it. I mean, even if you told me it was a crappy mic, I'd still go, I'm still spending money on this because I want it. And I didn't want that shell of a microphone that they sell for $40. I want
Right.
the whole thing. I want the whole shebang. I want it. Right? Okay, so I got it. I saved a little bit of money. I got it. It's not that expensive, but it's okay.
It's not that expensive though,
Yeah,
right?
it's not that expensive.
What does the Super 55 go for?
I think it's like $300, something like that.
Oh wow, it's more expensive than this one. The SM7B I think was
It is. It is. But
yeah,
yours is about 200 something. It's around this similar price
250
range.
something. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's the
similar
same.
price range.
You have a better mic because you're a richer guy, so fair enough.
No, not at all. I spend all my money on my mics and nothing on my podcast. It's great.
So you can't. It's now you can't
I
eat.
have priorities. I got them all right. So yeah, back to the podcast reason, right? It's exactly like what you're very, very similar to what you've mentioned, which is it's not about interviewing people. It's really about the telling of the stories, right? And I
Has to.
realize that many a times when we listen to content out there, especially there's so much targeted advertising that goes out there and says, hey, you should buy this, you should buy this, and this brand is great and that service is awesome. But
Right.
I can't get behind a brand, for example. Okay, I'm not mentioning anyone or anything in particular, but let's just say, for example, that this brand is an awesome brand, but if the person is a complete, the complete opposite of what a good public figure should be,
Right.
or an inspirational character, I can't get behind that brand. And then I realized, okay, how can we put stories together or put a platform together whereby many of these individuals, we can really humanize the brands now. We have an opportunity to create a platform to share with others that these are people who are successful in our eyes, who have done something wonderful with their products and services, who are definitely securing and cementing their place in the world and society, and gracious enough to share their learnings with us because they are still learning. They too wake up and put their pants on one leg at a time. They put on their shoes one foot at a time, hopefully, right? At the end of the day, we're all human. We all believe in that, and there's nothing more beautiful than, again, still going back to our roots of sitting around a hearth, a fire, and listening
Yep.
to stories of giant spaceships coming and sending us all sorts of new technology.
Yeah, and look, you've made an active choice to do video. I would ask you why you think the video side of it is so important.
Oh, I think that for me, it was a new thing because I started a really trashy podcast about 8 years ago. It was called The Singapod. It was absolutely trashy. Three guys drunk just on audio, right? But anyway, that's a story for another day, right? If I
Okay.
could still remember. But ultimately, I did dabble in the audio part of it. I realized, yeah, it works. It works. It's lovely. Then I thought, okay, might as well put it on YouTube, right? Because I can't seem to put audio on YouTube. So I said, screw it, and I'll just put video. So if you look at the very, very first video that I have on this channel, it's obscenely bad. Like it should not even be played on YouTube, but it's there, right? Everybody starts from somewhere. It's grainy. I was using a 10-year-old laptop that was literally it. I mean, seriously, I was staring at the laptop the way it was staring back at me with absolutely.
Like, what
Yeah,
are we doing here?
yes, why are we here? Are you kidding me? You had 10 years, dude, and now you're doing this to me? Are you kidding me? So it's like bringing a 60-year-old car to a drag race. Even the car's like going, what the hell are you doing?
I just want to go home, the car's saying.
Yeah. So that's exactly it. And then it became, I mean, I started getting wonderful support from all our listeners. And bit by bit, we just moved and improved, right? Just deep dived into it and go, okay, I made a mistake with the video. What can I do now? How do I improve
Right.
it? Do I need better
Right,
gear? Do I, yeah. And this is something that I think I would love to be able to share with everybody is that how anybody gets started with podcasting in itself. Like sometimes some people will think, oh, I need a gimmick, I need a persona, I need a story, I need all of this, I need the gear, I need something fancy, this and that, this and that. But ultimately, in my point of view, it boils down to content. Number one, what's your real message? What do you want
Right.
to provide to the world, right? Number two is, of course, then it gets technical, right? It's your ability, of course, and your audio. Audio is very important. I realize
Has
it's
to
more
be
important
good.
than video. Yeah, audio is so much more important than video. Once you screw up audio, everything goes. But I mean, that's just for me. Like, what about you? When you started out, what were your thoughts compared to now? And what kind of growth have you seen along the way in yourself?
So I asked you about video because I started with video. My first show was called Michael Talks Tech. We we shot with 3 cameras.
Wow,
We had
fancy.
professional. It was very fancy. We rented 3 cameras for a day. We spent like $1,000 a day to rent 3 cameras. We did 2 or 3 episodes a day. And my partner at the time was producing the video and spending like days editing. And he did a super great job. I mean, that's his business, right? So he did an incredible job at doing the editing and adding music tracks and adding a forward and an afterward and stuff, right? But it just became, and my philosophy back then was, if you do the video, you get the audio for free, right? Because it's not a silent movie.
Mm-hmm.
So you can always strip out the audio. I knew little back then about how many tracks of audio you could record. I highly recommend nobody does a 1-track audio recording
Mm.
because it makes it impossible to edit. If I sneeze now, you can't take it out because it'll take out something that you're saying, or if we're talking together, there's just no way to edit a 1-track audio in a way that sounds great, I think. But anyway, back then, so we did some pretty incredible recordings. We actually used a co-working space in Bangkok, in a way, a little surreptitiously. Like, we didn't tell them we were going to do it, but we just went in early on a Saturday and Sunday. Nobody was really there. And the floor where we were recording, mostly on Saturdays, nobody was there. And if somebody walked by, we kind of didn't care. The videos were really great, and they were like an hour long, and we had some pretty incredible people on it. But it was just taking up too much. It was too expensive. And when I say that, people think about the cost, meaning the price, but I don't really mean that. It was too time expensive, right? In other words, if I recorded a podcast yesterday, let's say, with Microsoft, it's already edited and the episode summary is already written, and I can publish it whenever I want. It's done. But if you want to have super high quality video production, it takes time, because now you're editing in 3 dimensions, right? Because you've got the time dimension, you've got the sound dimension, and you've got the video dimension. And even if I say something that I love, but the video is scratchy, how do you prioritize that? It's just hard when you're not using a bunch of different cameras and super high quality equipment and have super high quality editors on board, right? So doing that alone is super hard. I give you a ton of credit because I couldn't do it anymore. And frankly, the guy that I was working with just gave up. He was like, this is taking up way too much of my time.
Mm.
And I'm just going to go back to doing my regular business. But so I learned then a whole bunch of stuff. One is, have great partners. Nobody succeeds alone. But also, if you can get the right cadence on a podcast, get the right audio, which I think is super important. I've recorded, prior to buying this microphone, I've recorded with some very bad setups. And like you said, when I go back and listen, they're terrible. They're really terrible. They're embarrassingly terrible. But I don't care because, 700 recordings in, now I feel like I know what I'm doing. It's just like anything else. If I'd made 700 pizzas, I think I'd be pretty good at it. Right?
That is true.
But I think the sound really matters. And one of my friends at Morgan Stanley once said to me that one of Frank Sinatra's biggest inventions or innovations was that he used the microphone like it was another instrument. Right? So the combination of his voice and the microphone was another instrument, not just the band in the back. And that he figured out how to make it sound like melodic just using these 2 things. I think about that when I'm recording.
So okay, because I love music as well, and when any of the singers have to actually learn microphone dynamics,
Right.
this is something they don't really teach you in terms of nobody teaches you this stuff, the angle of your microphone, the kind of microphone. Nobody does. You just gotta figure it out until you get it right, because like what you mentioned, everybody's cadence is different, everybody's
Right.
projection will be different, everybody's plosives will be very different. How you do your P's and your B's and your M's
Correct.
and your O's and your, even the amount of how we breathe is so very, very important. So you've got such great technical skills at doing this. You see, I mean, you're using a windshield, right? You're only using
I'm just
a
using, so the
windshield.
SM7B ships with this windshield on it. This is the way it ships.
Correct.
And
you don't
I
even use
could,
the pop filter.
so my other microphone that I have here has a pop filter on it because it's a Rode pod mic. Yeah, I know. I would never use one of those, to be fair. First of all, I think they look terrible.
Yeah.
And second of all, I don't think they provide the right type of plosive protection or de-essing that you need. But I want to tell you a funny story, because you're right. Nobody teaches you mic technique. And I didn't know a darn thing about, I didn't even know the difference between a condenser mic and a dynamic mic. And when I went out to buy like my first fancy microphone, right, I'd made a little bit of money doing this. And I said, I know I need better equipment. Let me go buy a fancy mic. So I went out and I bought like a 150 or who knows how much money it cost me mic, but it was a condenser mic. And I just didn't understand why it didn't sound great. I didn't know. Anyway, I used that for a while. It sounded okay, but I wanted this sound. And I remember actually looking and watching other people, mostly on YouTube, to find out what kind of microphone they were using. It took me a while to figure out that this SM7B was what I wanted. But again, I still didn't know how to use it. And I went out and bought it and I hooked it up and it sounded terrible. It sounded really soft. I couldn't get like the, you know what a sound wave looks like, right? And you can tell if it's going to be too soft or too loud. I mean, obviously you can look at the clipping mechanisms, right? But without doing that, you just saw this tiny little wave. And I just thought, I mean, I spent all this money on this microphone. Is it broken?
So what did you find out to be the problem?
I do what I do now for everything. I went to YouTube and just literally typed in like how to use an SM7B just to make sure that I set it up properly.
Right.
In
So
fact,
you
I
needed
had
a cloud
set it
lifter.
up properly. Yeah, but I was thinking about getting a cloud lifter or a FET head or something like that. But I did not. What my problem was, I was using it like this.
Oh no. Okay.
I didn't know you had to do. I always thought, and I think a lot of people think this too. You know, when you see a musician in a studio having their mouth right up to the mic, you think, oh, this is just an affectation, not a skill. But actually, and you know this just from your own work, if you talk over here or if you speak over here, it's very different than if you speak here. And to be fair, your voice really only has to go across the mic. It doesn't have to go into the mic. It can. But all of these little things would be neat if somebody told you at the beginning.
Yeah, to be honest, we could make money from this. You know, just set up a real quick course, go online, listen to it. Hey, it's a 15-minute tech check, and it will save your life. To be honest, right, I was an idiot when I first bought this mic. When I first bought my very, very first XLR mic, I bought the cable, and then I bought a cheap mic. Right, I started with USBs, and then I moved on to one cheapo analog mic. And then after that, I thought, okay, yeah, I'm ready. And then I realized, shit, where do I plug it into?
What does it go into?
Yeah, I did not even have an audio interface.
What do you use now? I forget. I know we talked about this last time. You use the 2x2? 2i2?
I'm using the 2i2. Yeah, the Scarlett 2i2.
Focusrite,
so, yeah. So far it's okay. There's a cheaper one out there, but you know, look, I'm partly vain and partly operational. So that would mean that I want function and I want form.
Yes, I'm very similar. The 2i2 actually is what I recommend to people today to buy, even just for home use. And the reason why is because Focusrite makes great products. But the mistake that I made was I never thought I'd be in the same room with somebody and want another microphone plugged in.
So you bought the Solo.
I bought the Solo because I figured I'm just going to be doing this alone. I didn't understand what the other stuff, and again, I had no idea how to use it. And when I finally figured it out, I started laughing. But the the Focusrite stuff is actually really good. I upgraded as well. I mean, upgrade. I didn't upgrade. I just changed, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to have some more functionality. But I really trust this guy called Tom Buck. I don't know if you've ever listened to him.
Tom Buck.
But if I have a technical problem about recording audio or video, I just go to Tom Buck's YouTube page. He's sensible, a little goofy, but very sensible. I think he's purposely goofy, and I've learned a ton there.
Okay. Hey,
Just
shout
a
out to Tom
ton.
Buck. If you,
Yeah.
I don't think he'll be listening, but yeah, check it out. Tom Buck. He's wow. He's got a lot of stuff in Final Cut. He's got thumbnails. Wow, that's a
So
lot.
he teaches this. So he partially creates this for for us.
Mm-hmm.
It also creates stuff for his classes as well. So he's very good at this. He's got a good voice. He's got an incredible setup at home. He and his wife podcast weekly. He does a few different shows, but I've learned a ton here. A ton.
All right. And that's on the technical aspect. Now, in terms of content, right? Where do you get your inspiration from? I'm sure that as a podcaster, you too would be listening to the podcast. Who do you listen to?
So that's a great question. I want to say that my introduction to podcasting was with a guy named John Gruber. And to be honest, I don't even know how I found him. I really don't. I read tech news, and I've been doing that for years, and I mean like decades actually. I used to get the Wall Street Journal when I was in college, and I started reading Walt Mossberg's technology column when it first came out. And I remember thinking, wow, that's got to be the coolest job in the world, because he writes for like a real newspaper, right? He wasn't writing for PC Magazine, nothing against them, or Macworld.
Mm-hmm.
He was writing for the Wall Street Journal, and he invented that because he was already a writer at the Journal. And he said, I want to write about tech because I think tech is going to be consumerized, and I think it's going to change the way people live. And they said, okay. And that literally made him famous, right? So he went from just being this obscure dude at the Wall Street Journal, to somebody who started this business with Kara Swisher called All Things Digital, right? They started doing these conferences and stuff.
Yep.
And they just got uber famous. But my first podcast was the talk show with John Gruber. And because he still has this website called Daring Fireball. I still don't know why he calls it that. I probably found this back in like 1997 or 1998. I can't remember. But when Steve Jobs came back to Apple, a lot of people started blogging about like, this is going to be a disaster, this is going to be great, or whatever. And Gruber at the time was a technologist, but started doing this blog called Daring Fireball. And then he had a show as well called The Talk Show, where he talked about Apple. And he actually talked about Apple with this guy named Dan Benjamin. So Dan basically did what you and I do. He hosted the show, but it was really just so Gruber had a weekly platform to talk, to kind of be like an online pundit for Apple in the podcast space. And they would have like 2 hour or 2.5 hour conversations. I just thought, this is great.
Because it gave you such insight and insider news that you wouldn't have gotten, or at least I would assume
It's
it
too
wouldn't
long.
have been shown in
It's
any
too
kind of
long.
newspaper. Too long? 2
Yeah,
hours?
no, I mean, it's too long to write an article about that. No one's going to read it, but people will listen to the conversation. And I learned a whole bunch of different things about that. First of all, Dan Benjamin was the pioneer in the podcast network space in the United States, started a company called 5by5.tv. And for anybody who's interested really in learning about podcasting, watch Dan Benjamin's stuff as well. He was really the pioneer, but a few other people started doing it back then. And this is also when I started thinking about the business. So I always wondered, like, who was getting paid and how are they getting paid? Because after a certain amount of time, Gruber left the 5by5 network and then kind of signed on with somebody else to do the production for like a year. And there was a little bit of clamoring going on in the sort of Apple pundit space when he left. And then when he left, the second guy went to do it himself. I thought, there must be so much money in this. And it turned out there is. But he left and started doing his own production because he figured, I'm now going to be the host. I'm now going to get the guests, and I'm going to control this conversation myself. And that was an epiphany for me.
And eventually, what did you model your show? I mean, what was it in that show that actually got you hooked? And what was it that you actually took away from that to model it into your own show?
So remember back then that Apple was like this little crappy company that was going to go bankrupt.
Yep.
But I told you I started really, really getting into tech when I was young. And, you know, I used to have a typewriter at college and I used to have to write papers on it. And it was a nightmare. And I was poor. I was on a full scholarship. And I think I probably stole that typewriter from my mom. And, you know, paper to me came at a premium because if I messed up, you know, you had that whiteout stuff, but it looked terrible. And I didn't want to turn it in with that. And I couldn't afford to just keep buying paper.
Mm.
And I went to a college where, like, you know, 98% of the people were ridiculously rich. Like my roommate's mother, its name was on one of the auditoriums.
Okay, that's money.
Are you with me?
Mm.
Anyway, one day I saw a kid walking around with a computer. And he was walking around with it. So my roommate actually bought one of the first compact laptops or portables. It was more like a compact suitcase, but it still looked really cool.
Yeah.
And you could see where it was going. But the thing that killed me was the guy walking around with the Macintosh. I actually remember saying to him, "What is that?" And when I figured out what it was, I said, "Can I borrow that to write my paper?" He was like, "Sure." And I was just write this incredible stuff. And it didn't matter because if you write it out of order or if you have the wrong spelling or do anything wrong, like when you first see a word processor, it's like a gift from God. It just is. You're like, you mean I backspace and it's just gone? It's a weird thing to think about today. But anyway, so I knew what the Mac was. And when Steve Jobs came back, everyone, you have to remember the famous Michael Dell line. What would you do with Apple if you bought it? It's shut it down and I'd give the money back to the shareholders. So I followed Apple really closely because I'm kind of an underdog kind of guy. And I liked his format of having guests come on and talk about tech. And again, if you just like super fast forward to like a few years ago, nobody was doing that in Southeast Asia. I wanted to have my own show. I'd already tested a couple of ideas. They kind of worked. And the Asia Tech Podcast just sounded like the perfect name. And to be fair, the other guys that I listen to a lot do this thing called the Accidental Tech Podcast. You may notice a similarity.
Yep.
Well, they both start with A. So ATP is an abbreviation that I love. And the guys that do the Accidental Tech Podcast are brilliant. Marco Arment was one of the first developers to work on Tumblr. So he was probably a shareholder. So when Tumblr got sold to Yahoo, you know, my grandmother always said to me, "Don't count anybody else's money." So I don't know how much money he made, but I think it was more than $1 million. If it got sold for $1 billion, and he was literally the first engineer that was hired there. And to be fair, Marco also invested in Gimlet Media, which then sold to Spotify for $230 million. And Marco's got a pretty good track record, but he's also an incredible technologist. He wrote Instapaper, which was one of the first applications on the iPhone that could actually save things off the internet and allow you to read it later if you didn't have connectivity. And just listening to him talk with John Siracusa, who was the guy who wrote the seminal reviews of OS X every year for Ars Technica, also a deep technologist, understands all this stuff inside and out. Just the conversations that they have, kind of moderated by their friend Casey Liss, are just super good. And when I listen to that stuff, I want to have those same conversations out here because no one's really doing it. And to be fair, nobody's really skilled to do it. Like Marco's superpowers, he could make really technical things really simple for people to understand. You know, John's super detailed and has a real great sense of like operating systems and file systems and stuff like that. And if you're into that kind of tech, it's super. And Casey does a pretty good job of moderating it. So it's great to listen to.
And have you found yours?
Yeah, I think I have. I like being able to. So on this show, I will talk a lot because you've invited me to talk. I could sit here and ask you questions all day because I'm very interested. but I don't think that's your modus operandi. So there's that. But I've always been a really good listener. I'm super interested in other people, right? So I'm an extrovert, which most people misunderstand as someone who likes to get a lot of attention, but it's really a person who gets energy from other people. And as an extrovert, it means I love having a conversation with other people. I like being able to tease things out of them that maybe they haven't spoken about yet, and introducing them and informing the rest of the world about them. And that makes me really happy.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's something I did want to, I mean, you actually jumped right into it. I did want to ask you what it's like for you to be on the other side of the table now. Because most of the time, like what you mentioned, you're the one who's asking the questions and you're listening. But now all of a sudden, the roles are reversed. Does it feel uncomfortable for you? I know sometimes it's nice. It's very reflective in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, I'm self-aware. I'm also, what's the right word? Introspective. I think about what I do, who I am, the consequences of that a lot. I'm not always right, but I'm always happy to talk about it, if that makes sense. But I want to be clear about this. For my show, because that's what we're talking about, it's important to me that it's not about me.
Yep.
You notice the name of that show is not called Michael Waitze's Asia Tech Podcast. You notice if you look at the podcast page, it almost never mentions my name. You'll see no pictures about me. There are plenty of people out there that are trying to do this, but their narcissism gets in the way of their storytelling. Anyway, as I told you before, my mother always said, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. So I'm going to stop it there. But I will say that it's pretty clear that I'm not trying to tell stories about me. So it makes me happy that I can tell stories about other people. And do I mind being on the other side of the table? Not at all. Because I do think life is a conversation. I told you that. I'm happy to have a conversation. I actually encourage my guests to ask me questions as well, but most of them don't. It's not normal to them to do that in this format.
Right.
Right? Like I'm happy asking you questions. I asked you about your microphone. I'm really curious what that red thing is behind you on the wall.
It's the stress test kind of thing. It's a wall bag. That's why there are two boxing gloves there as well.
I wasn't sure if those were boxing gloves.
Yeah. Yeah, from time to time, I'll hold mitts for my son as well, so that he can get a little bit of exercise in from time to time.
How old is he?
He's 10. They grow up fast, man.
That's real.
They really do. Oh, absolutely.